Welcome to another BAFTA event. My name is Haydn Smith, and I'm delighted to be here today with some of the cast and crew of Calm with Horses. If this is the first time that you're tuning into one of these events, if you would like closed captioning, there is a button at the bottom of this screen that you can click on and you can get that. Also, you'll see another button for Q&A. If you bring that up, you can send in a question to us. Just let us know who you are. So we have quite a group with us today. First of all, I'd like to welcome the director of Calm with Horses, Nick Rowland. Hi, Nick.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Also, we have the writer of the film, Joe Murtagh. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
And Dan Emmerson, the producer. Hey, Dan.
Hi, everyone.
And we've got two of the actors from the film, Niamh Algar and Cosmo Jarvis. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Okay, welcome you all. Cosmo, I think you just need to take your sound off. That's, I think you've currently got it muted at the moment.
Sorry.
Okay,
Hello.
welcome. I'm going to start with you, Nick and Joe first, just to talk about the origins and what it was that attracted you to Colin Barrett's short story.
So I found the Young Skins' collection in my final year of film school, which would have been in about 2014. And I was writing my graduation film at the time and doing quite a bad job. So I was just trying to read as many good short stories as possible. And I just fell in love with Calm with Horses in particular because, I mean, it had the skeleton of a kind of genre thriller, but there was a lot of heart and emotion to it, and I really sort of cared for Arm. And I just enjoyed spending time with all of the characters, no matter how questionable things they get up to. They had a sort of eccentricity to them and a kind of a humour, a sort of dark humour to the piece as well. So it felt like quite a rich story, and the kind of contrast between Arm's professional life and the way he's so violent but has such a kind of sort of sensitive relationship with his son, I thought was an interesting contrast.
And Joe, because I know you two have worked together previously on shorts, can you talk about your involvement?
Yeah, so a big part of it was that previous work I had done with Nick at film school. We worked on a couple of short films together, and I think we had just clicked very well. I think we had a nice kind of a shorthand way of communicating when it came to film, and so a big part of me for getting involved with Calm with Horses was just a chance to continue that relationship in a feature film environment rather than short film. And secondly, it was just all about the book. It was all about Colin Barrett's writing. I was just completely drawn to the world. I have, my family is from the same part of the world, and I could just really see myself in it. I could see a way into the story. Yeah.
And was transferring a short story into a screenplay. I've heard some writers talk about the fact it's sometimes easier to take a short story than it is to take a novel, because you have what's essentially a skeleton rather than the full body.
Yeah,
and you can build it up yourself.
I've also heard that, and I am assuming it to be true, but I've never adapted a full novel, but it was definitely what was brilliant about adapting this in particular was the fact that it was a short story or rather a novella, meant that yes, there was a framework, there was a scope in there, and there was still room to add myself into it and make it a little more plot friendly, cinema friendly, screen friendly. But at the same time, there's so much richness to Colin's writing that it also, even when you're making stuff up or creating new characters or new situations, I'd imagine it's easier to do in this case than it was with anything else, because his writing is so rich. It's not hard to imagine new characters and new situations that are part of this same world. I've said it a bunch of times in the past, but I still feel like any of the additions we made, any of the new stuff we made up, still weirdly belongs to Colin, because it was all just so inspired by not just by Calm with Horses, but by the entire Young Skins collection.
Now, Dan, I gather that you were interested in adapting this at exactly the same time, and that's sort of indirectly how you came on board? have we lost Dan? I think you need to take your mute off, Dan.
Sorry, I'm there. I'm with you. Sorry. Could you say that again, Ian?
Yeah, I gather at the same time that these guys were interested in adapting Colin's book, you were also thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, no. Nick sent it to me originally,
right.
And so that was that. He sent it to me, and as he said, he was at the NFTS, and he said, I found a short story which is really cool. And I started looking into the rights, and separately had been sent to Fassbender and Connor at DMC, who I didn't work for at the time, and they were looking into optioning it, and as a result of us sort of being in competition on it, I ended up joining up with them, and we optioned it together as the first thing that we did. So yeah, it was credit to Nick. Nick found it and sent it over for sure.
I want to come back to you in a moment to talk about the logistics of funding, but Niamh and Cosmo, when you got the script, what was your first reaction to it? Perhaps Niamh, you answer first.
I just love the script. I was aware of obviously Colin Barrett's novella, so I had loved what they had developed into a feature. You know, you've got such flawed and complex characters that really captured this rural setting that I hadn't seen portrayed in Ireland. So it was a mixture of like a Western meets, it was kind of untimely. And then I just, you know, I fell in love with Ursula. You know, it was the first time that I read a really strong, powerful woman who never actually loses her focus throughout the whole story. And I thought that was really refreshing. And the fact that I knew that Cosmo was also attached and Barry was at the time, I knew it was going to be really special.
Cosmo.
Yeah, I just love the script, and like Nick said about the eccentricity that came across in the writing, and how that all felt unusually to me at the time. It felt unusually like coherent with itself, like in a way that a lot of other stuff that I had read hasn't, but you always sort of want it to, and that was great. Just the language basically, and the sort the I hadn't read the book first, but so I only read the script, and then the format and the simplicity of the journey and what was at the heart of it, the simplicity of what was at the heart of it was really nice to read.
In terms of the character of when you read him on the page, did you have a very, very specific idea of what he would be when you went in to have conversations with Nick about the character and how much you brought with you to it?
No, but I didn't know for a long time. It took a lot of messing around with and experimentation and big, like lots of conversations and stuff. But I guess initially it felt like the quality of the words. It seemed like a nice challenge to try and take words like that and then give it like kind of throw them away, I guess. Not in a throwing away kind of way, but I don't really know what I'm saying. Yeah, I knew that realism would have been important in trying to make it executable and you know, plausible, especially something that was as eccentric as some of the characters and happenings in the narrative.
Niamh, you just mentioned about Ursula. I found really interesting that she is someone who has direction. She knows exactly what she wants. She is on this journey and all these things happen to her. But the fact is she knows the destination she wants to reach. Watching it again today, I found it really interesting. I thought this is a character that you could play many different ways. And it could be a character that perhaps on one level you might have less empathy for than you do. And I was just wondering, as you were thinking about Ursula, about how you'd portray her, sort of what went through your mind about the scenes that you're in and whether you always knew exactly what she would be.
That's interesting you should say that, because I know that there could have been a version where she could be this nagging, I told you so ex-girlfriend who could have come across kind of not villainous, but you'd be less empathetic. But I think it was just making sure that the choices of what she's doing it was always grounded in the truth. And you know, her main focus was always going to be Jack. But you know, I just wanted to make sure that she wasn't, you know, there was more going on. You know, you read the script, and I think what is really the best part about being an actor is that you just keep on adding more and more layers and kind of secrets that you never really share with the audience. It's just always there. And I think that there was always a lot more going on with Ursula than what was on the page. And I think it was just trying to develop that between her and Arm. And I think that's, you know, it's a lot of what is going on with her is not said, and I think that's more interesting. And
Cosmo's
gonna call. But yeah,
it's coming through. Sorry, Niamh.
No, but yeah, she's got a lot of patience as well, which you see, you know, there's a lot of like obstacles that come across throughout her story. You know, she does, like, you know, she is someone who could have gone down a different path than what Arm has.
It struck me watching the way that you play her, that what's essentially is, no matter where she's gone in subsequent years, you still have to see the Ursula that Arm had fallen in love with in the first place. Yeah. And I thought you do that really, really well. You get this sense of the caring side of her, not just through her son, but just as a person.
Yeah, well, I think that when she has Jack, he reminds her so much of what she fell in love with Arm. And I think that's something that she's always going to be tied with. And she can't help but deny the fact that he's always going to be a part of their lives. And I think she's just kind of fighting for that. And, you know, there has to be a chemistry between the two of them in order for him to have something to fight for throughout the story. And that's what you, as an audience, that's what you're kind of hoping for, is that he could see that rainbow at the end.
I've got a question from one of the viewers, and please do send in your questions. I'm sure our guest today would rather hear from you than me. This is from Andy Whip. How is Arm's sofa phone call scene handled? Can you hear me? Sorry.
I've got you back now.
Okay, good. From Andy Whip, how was Arm's sofa phone call scene handled? Was it similar in the short story? Because it was beautifully performed and incredibly moving. Joe, perhaps we can get you to start with that.
In the short story, it was there was a similar kind of phone conversation that happened slightly earlier in the story when Arm had a sense that things might be about to go wrong, rather than, you know, in the film where that fact is a little more definite. No, it wasn't. It was a. How would I explain it? I suppose in the short story, it was a little more played down, and what we did is we expanded it, and then of course Nick worked with these guys to deliver it in the way that he did.
Nick, can you talk about that scene as well?
Yeah, it was. Obviously, we decided to do it in one long take. It felt important to stay with Arm for the duration, because for the whole third act of the story, Arm is kind of starved of seeing Ursula and Jack. So I thought the emotion would be stronger if you know, it was not a conversation that was sort of cutting back and forth. We sort of stayed in Arm's point of view. And that obviously put a lot of pressure on Cosmo, because it's the, you know, without that scene, we don't really have an ending, or we don't, you know, that is the ending of the film. You know, it's one of, I think we did like eight takes or so, and it was. You know, we definitely got to the end of that day being relieved that we got it, but I went into the day being completely confident that Cosmo would nail it, because, like I say, from the first time I met Cosmo, it felt very clear to me that he understood the spine of who this character was, and especially on an emotional level. So that, yeah, it was, it's all a bit of a blur, really. I think it was around the middle of the shoot, and I think we did 8 takes, and I think we used take 7 from memory. So, but each take was brilliant. So it was a hard choice.
I was going to say, Cosmo, did you, with your and I know process is not necessarily always the easiest thing to talk about, but not just with that scene, but with the development of a character as a whole. When you were approaching scenes, I'm not sure how much of the film was improvised or how many of the lines were improvised, but could you talk about how you came to the scenes, particularly the longer takes?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult. I mean, it's always different. Every scene's different, and I don't know. Just always trying to come at it from a point of view of trying to root it in some sort of plausible reality, despite the craziness of what appears to be happening to these people. It just varies depending on the scene. Sometimes they just sort of fall into place, and other times you have to sort of, toil a bit more, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me when I was watching the film is the way that you use your voice, not just the fact that you have quite a brilliant accent. But your friend was completely surprised. An Irish friend didn't even realise that you weren't Irish. But it's also the softness of your voice. There is that incredible contrast between your sheer physicality in the film and the way that you speak.
Yeah, I mean, I because he didn't say a lot in the when I first read it, like Arm's dialogue it's what there is of it, it's quite to the point, and it's in and out, and I knew that I was just trying to imagine what if I had heard those words coming out of somebody from that sort of place with that kind of background as described, then I was just sort of trying to imagine what they might sound like. That's about it. But yeah, I just love voices and that.
Nick, I've got a question from George, who asks, what do you look for in scripts when choosing something to direct?
I would say, well, I'm a very I like all different types of films and genres, so I would never want to kind of get stuck into one type of story. But I think I'm not. I wouldn't really describe myself as an intellectual filmmaker. I'm definitely someone who's driven. I'm quite sensitive and I'm quite emotional, and for me, a lot of what I'm looking for is just feeling for a character. And like I say, that's the one thing that struck me about Calm with Horses. Is actually I was less interested in making I've never had any ambitions to make a gang movie or like a gangster movie, and that's not what attracted me to Calm with Horses. It was the emotion I felt at the end for the sort of tragedy of Arm, and even in the book, the phone call in its form there still made me cry, and I really, it just I felt for the guy so much. So that's generally, I'm looking for that heartbeat, that kind of emotional punch somewhere in a story. It was so exciting to see what Cosmo did with it on the day, and it was great because we wanted it to be as real as possible. So Niamh was actually there on set that day as well, and they're actually on the phone together at the same time. So it's a real.
I was behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Right over
and
there.
What really touches me about it is, you could play that scene in a very sort of emotional way, or in a way where it really feels like you're reaching for the emotion and trying to, it was important that the audience hopefully don't feel manipulated too much. And there's such a minimal kind of everydayness to the phone call, which is what I find so emotional. And just the exhaustion in Cosmo's performance, I really loved.
Cosmo, were you going to say something then? Or?
I was just, it just reminded me of something that I failed to elaborate on earlier. I was just going to say that, like, maybe one of the things that I was going to say, in addition to the things that were attractive about the script in the first place, was the emotional undercurrents throughout everything. Obviously, I meant to say that, but I didn't say it before. I just meant that the fact that the sentiment at the root of the whole story was the, you know, as well as the writing and everything, but the whole mashup was the most appealing thing, because it was such a delicate, simple and delicate thing that you know, everybody has things like that in their life, but to try and show these kinds of, like, what Nick, what word did you use to describe the phone call just then? I forgot what you said just then.
I can't remember.
But there was something like very everyday about it. The everyday quality of it was something really that I hadn't seen very often when reading stuff. That when it's written that well, and how it does seem totally buyable and throwaway even on the page. Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
There is something very interesting about the writing, Joe, in the way that we, you know, every day, as Cosmo is saying, we react probably with more than 2 or 3 emotions at any point in time. And one of the things I found really interesting with a lot of the scenarios in the film is that I was on the edge of my seat, not because I thought there was going to be a moment's violence, but because I really genuinely didn't know how each of the characters was going to react, because there was this sense that their emotions were so complex. Was that easy to put down on the page? And then perhaps, Nick, from page to screen?
I mean, I'm very happy to hear you say that, obviously. I think it's kind of like the accidental result of just all of us working together. Do you know, I think, you know, if left to my own devices, I tend to write stuff that's slightly more comical or darkly comical. And, you know, I like to use subgenres and things like that. And then Nick, as he said, he's more interested in the emotions of the characters. And I think we gel quite well together. And you had Dan to the mix, you had Cosmo to the mix, Niamh to the mix. You know, I think it's just a kind of I like what Cosmo said before when he said a mashup. I think that's the kind of filmmaking I'm certainly interested in. So yeah, if you can feel any number of emotions in the scene, whether it's laughter or, yeah, I mean, I just like to keep people on their toes, but it's very much a group effort.
So Nick, a really good example of this is the nightclub scene, which I was just convinced was going to be some kind of minor bloodbath, and it goes in a very different direction.
Yeah, I guess that scene is quite a good example of the general kind of language of the story that we try, you know, filmmaking grammar that we try to apply to the story, because I guess on the page could be quite unsympathetic, and he's obviously, you know, he's not talking too much, and sometimes, you know, he's not very good at articulating or even knowing how he feels. We thought the more we could limit the point of view to his and make sections of the story quite subjective and to sort of be in his head, it would just allow us to stay rooting for him. So like in that club scene, it's down to, you know, obviously the kind of the point of view of the camera, but also the sound design and like the music in the club, the diegetic sound. It's the club that everyone's dancing, the track that everyone's dancing to, but the music in the club changes and reacts to the drama in the scene and how Arm is feeling. We apply things like that to try and kind of communicate how he's feeling, as well as, you know, supporting what Cosmo's doing and a sort of very physical performance. Overall, in terms of, like, for me, the biggest challenge of the film, actually, when you look at it, there's a simplicity to it which I really like, and there's a classical feel to the story. But actually, I found it incredibly complicated to direct, just because of all these competing tones. You know, there is a kind of crime thriller skeleton, but then there's a huge amount of family drama and emotion in it, and then the kind of slightly absurd or comedic moments to kind of break the tension. So just trying to find a way of feeling like everything's organically moving between these things, rather than it feeling like you're mixing oil and water together was, it just required a lot of fine balancing, I guess.
We've just had a whole bunch of questions coming in. I've got a couple here, one from Erica, another from Mick, asking about working with Kildren, who plays Jack. Could you talk first of all, and then I'll go to the actors?
Yeah, so Cillian, he's amazing. 5 years old when we started filming. He had never acted before. He was just a local boy that we found. Nick McGinley and Shaheen Baig, our casting directors, sort of, we went over the whole of Ireland looking for the right boy, and we found Cillian. And the character of Jack was, out of everything in the story, it was the thing I was most nervous of, and for me was the greatest challenge for me as a director. How was I going to portray Jack and his autism in a way that was real and authentic? So we developed the script with the National Autistic Society from a very early stage, and they were really great and supportive and helpful in developing the character as far as we could on the page. But then their advice was we would not be able to work with a boy that young who was on the spectrum, because of the, as you'll see from the scenes there, some of them are quite distressing. So it became about, well, how do we sort of elicit that performance from Cillian? And actually, Lenny Abrahamson, obviously, because Element Pictures were our co-producers, they were able to put me in touch with him, and he was really helpful, actually. We spoke a lot about how he worked with Jacob on his movie Room.
Yep.
And it became basically about breaking down the performance into little bite-sized chunks, and to give this sense that he's being overstimulated by all of his senses. It was actually became a very, very simple game of, when you try and stroke your stomach and pat your head at the same time. It's essentially that game, but sort of dramatized. So it would be how many, in the diner scene, it would be how many mustard bottles can you count in the room, but at the same time, can you do your 5 times table, or maths in your head, or getting to sort of use as many stimulus as possible, I guess, was like the base of the performance. And then it was a large part of it was getting Niamh and Cosmo to spend as much time with him as possible and build up trust between them and build up a history together, so they could feel like a real family and they could feel safe around each other to be physical or to shout at each other or whatever you see in the film.
Niamh, obviously not listening to the advice of never work with children and animals by working with both children and animals.
The same day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The scenes with Cillian that you're in are quite beautiful. How easy did you find performing those scenes?
I think it's easy. Not that it's easy to work with kids, but they're really honest, especially about what you're doing in the scene. Because if they don't believe it, they'll tell you, which is great. But yeah, it was really, really fun to work with Cillian, and I suppose there's when you're 5, this is just one big game, really. This whole world with cameras, and then between takes they just want to talk about football. But I think it was just maintaining like the research I did beforehand, especially with Autism Ireland, and just where Ursula's head was at then, and just that extra pressure of being a parent, what she felt like was a lone parent, and then also the trials and tribulations that come with a little boy that she feels doesn't have a voice and is incredibly vulnerable in that state. So but what, having Nick there and having this language that he developed basically with Cillian was just really, really helpful. And also, but you've got like, it's tricky enough with when you have like the logistics of working out what you can shoot and everything is kind of determined on hours, especially working with kids and also horses, who actually I don't think they can spend less time on a set than a child. But yeah, we spent like a couple of days just like going to getting pizza and going to like this ballpark. It's one of these like soft clay areas with Killian and Cosmo, and I think Cosmo benefited way more out of it than Killian did.
Yeah, it was great. It's one of the best times we've ever had. But yeah, it was good.
It's interesting with you, Cosmo, thinking about the scene in the fairground, which I found one of the most moving scenes in the film, because you've got this huge bulk of a man who communicates through his physicality, trying to comprehend dealing with a child for whom that kind of physicality is a real problem.
Yeah. In terms of Arm's relationship with Jack, I guess I knew it was important to not make it too much like a father and son, because I thought that it would be better to sort of just treat him like my equal, because then that would I knew that he couldn't fully recognize what a father would be to a child in a way that a father should care for their child if their child is not maybe 100%, because not in a nefarious way, just in the way that he just can't see it himself maybe. But yeah, it was great having Killian around, because he it's not until you get older you realize the stuff that sort of, well, for me anyway, stops me from playing well as I did when I was younger. So he's obviously still in that realm at the time, so he would definitely smell when something was, remotely dishonest or anything like that.
Dan, I want to come to you. I've got a question from Robert Del Maestro. First of all, congratulations on the film. He wants to know about where it was shot. Could you talk about the locations for the film?
Yeah, we shot the film in Kilkee, in down in the west of Ireland, and then a little bit in a small town called Loughrea, and also up in the mountains in Connemara. So it was all on the west of Ireland, and splitting across three places was definitely a challenge in terms of a schedule that was already under a lot of strain. But when we went on the recce's, the first recce, probably a year before we made the film, we went through the mountains in Connemara, where the car chase happens, and we'd recce'd all over Ireland, there's loads of stunning places that we stopped at. But when we got to the Connemara Mountains, Nick sort of stopped and he was like, this is it, this is where I want to make the film. And so then from then on, it became about how we could make that possible, really. And it was we sort of built the shoot around that, and it was really hard, but a lot of people seem to have responded to the car chase and those mountains and stuff. So hopefully it was worth the challenges of trying to get those catering trucks up those little hills.
Nick, it's quite interesting, because you watch the film and you're thankfully not seeing this very stereotypical image of the Emerald Isle. Can you talk about the conversations that you had with Piers McGrail, your cinematographer, on how you wanted this landscape in the film to look?
It was always kind of harking back to how it felt in the book, really. With Piers and also with Damien, the production designer, it became, a lot of it was about finding the right locations. I remember reading the book and it feeling like this, the town was this frontier town in a western, and it was under siege from the elements and the mountains and the sea, and there was an isolation to it and a danger to it. But when we first got the option to the story, I went out to Castle Bar in Mayo, where Colin is originally from, and it's where his original inspiration for the book. And I arrived there, and it was the friendliest place in the world. There was like postmen waving at you every 2 seconds, and cottages, and hedgerows, and happy looking cows everywhere and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like a place where Calm with Horses takes place. So so finding places like Connemara was important, because a lot of that, you have the huge mountains, but also it's kind of bogland as well. So there's no farming activity or any sense of much human footprint. So, because we really wanted it to feel like once you leave the town, you're in the middle of nowhere, and these uncles have, Joe kind of coined this phrase of like isolation breeds. I can't remember what it was now. Isolation breeds eccentricity and danger or something. But, so the emptiness was really important, and but we didn't like. There's a version of this film that could have been much more sort of council estates, kind of gritty, grim, and we didn't want that. We wanted it to feel kind of epic and beautiful, and I definitely wouldn't say the film is social realism at all. So yeah, we tried to use color, like the club, we tried to use color and the sound design and the locations and the design, the design of a lot of the locations. We wanted it to feel a bit like a time warp, a town that had sort of been left behind. So a lot of the design choices were like from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and to kind of give the whole feel of a kind of analog, sort of old fashioned, slightly hard to place kind of feel.
I've got a couple of questions regarding the editing. Tom Williams asked, did you experiment in the edit with the timing of the reveal that Arm doesn't toss the old fella off the cliff after all, or was it only ever going to be a couple of minutes of misdirection?
Yeah, that was all. I mean, not just in the edit, but actually in the script as well. It was all. I was always. I can't remember, Joe, if it's linear in the script or not. But we always knew it was an option of we could delay that a little bit, because we, how many, is it going to be too obvious that he's going to let him go, or could we hold it? Originally, I think maybe in the first cut, I tried to hold it until you actually arrive at the farm, and you see what's happened. But so we found, we did mess around with it a lot. But it kind of felt, it felt like the tension wouldn't sustain as well if you held it off too long. You kind of need to be with Arm and understand what he's going through. But at the same time, it seemed quite fun to sort of hopefully misdirect people for a moment.
I've got a question from Andy. It's probably for both you, Joe, and Nick. Was there an influence of Lenny and George of Mice and Men in the Dimpner-Arm relationship?
To my shame, I've never read or seen of Mice and Men, but I know.
We'll edit this. You can lie. Just say yes.
So technically no, but it is something that then started coming up quite a lot. So maybe it's just one of these things, one of these tropes that's just sort of, you see it in a lot of things that I have seen, that was influenced by of Mice and Men. But yeah, short answer, no, not for me anyway.
And just in terms of, stay with you, the Divas, creating the Divas, Ned Dennehy, David Wilmot, and Barry, amongst the others. What idea you had, both you and Nick, about how you would present this clan, that they don't kind of fall into sort of a trap of being yet another British criminal or British or Irish criminal gang, which they don't feel like that?
They're all about family. It's that thing of even your villains need to think that they're the good guys, and they're the heroes of the story in their mind. They're protecting the family, and they're protecting not just in terms of retribution, but they're protecting the family from any further harm coming to them. So they need to lay down the law. That's what they've always done, and they expect Dimpner to do the same. So it's really just about following that logic all the way throughout, and then of course just being aware of all the fun villainous tropes that you can kind of sneak in there, with that logic still making sense. Especially with Ned's character, I try to have quite a lot of fun with the language of it, and that's something that Ned himself then built on. He added in quite a few great lines himself into that.
Nick?
Yeah, I like I said, there's a kind of, reading the original short story as well, there is there's an oddness and eccentricity to them that I found really. They're quite big characters, but I kind of quite like that, and I liked the kind of big fish in a small pond kind of in the original short story, the uncles are they're just kind of more traditional farmers, and I just like the idea of them being these sort of gangster kingpins, but they're sort of talking about only washing once a week, and looking. I think Pordy in the book is described as a taxidermy fox with glass eyes, I think, and so just it kind of created this really sort of mad images in my mind. So that was definitely like a big attraction to it. That it wasn't. I guess that's part of the set, that the whole setting as well. But it felt, there's a familiar nature to the story, but I hadn't seen it in this part of the world.
Dan, I've got a question from Ed Rigg asking how the funding was pulled together, and was there a lot of persuasion needed?
We had amazing support from Film 4 throughout the development process, and it was, as Nick, I think Nick said, Nick first sent me a text in 2014, so 6 years ago, and we worked away, and there was a moment in time where Sam Lavender and Ollie Madden at Film 4 came in and said that they felt it was ready to go and that we could make it. We should go for it and make it. And then from there, it was a case of Screen Island coming in via an Irish co-production partner, which was Element, that came on board. So we had Element and Screen Island, and then Altitude came in to distribute the film in the UK and Ireland with Element, and they were part of the finance plan. And we got support from the RAP Fund as well, which is a Western regional fund there. So it was, I think, financing independent debuts, and it was, it was a challenging one. It was ambitious. It's always really difficult, but everyone loved Nick's films, and Joe had written a wonderful script, and that really helped to give us the momentum that you need going in.
And Cosmo, I mentioned earlier about your accent, being very impressive, but your physical transformation is quite extraordinary for the film. From what point did you come on board? How long was it till you actually got to filming, and how tough was it to actually transform to? First of all, your neck is enormous in the film.
I mean, yeah, we knew it had to happen fairly quickly, because I know nothing about the human anatomy or exercise, but we knew that we had to get sorted quite quickly, and so I started working with this dude called George, and drinking lots of shakes and eating lots, but it wasn't that hard. But I think it's because I'm diabetic and I take insulin, and I think that insulin messes with the growth process of muscles, so I might have had a leg up, but I'm not sure. But it was just, I like food anyway, so that was fairly easy. Food's good. It's just the press ups were the problem. But after a while, I got used to them.
Cosmo's playing it down, Ian. Like he moved himself to Ireland 5 weeks before we started shooting, and stayed in accent from then until when we wrapped. And he worked so incredibly hard throughout the process. We were all very lucky to have had him.
Thanks for the job,
Being
guys.
modest.
On that point, we have come to the end of this session. If you missed any of it, or if you want someone else to listen to it, you can actually download it from SoundCloud. If you want to find out about upcoming BAFTA events, please do go to the BAFTA website, where there will be details of what's coming up. Thank you very much to Catherine, who's been doing the closed captioning throughout the whole of this event. And
well done.
Thank you to Nick, to Joe, to Dan, to Niamh, and to Cosmo for joining us today. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.